Hello, good afternoon, or good morning. This is Brett Lonsdale from Lightning Tools, and I'm here with Penny Coventry. Hopefully you'll be able to hear Penny Coventry now. Do you want to say hi, Penny? Make sure we can hear you.
Coventry here.
Hi, how you doing? So yeah, Coventry here, and we're just 10 miles away from Coventry, so it's not too bad. First of all, thank you very much, everybody, for attending this session on business connectivity services. It's going to be co-presented between myself and also Penny, and I'll allow Penny to introduce herself in just a moment. But yeah, welcome very much to the session, and just a reminder, make sure that you're not attending the wrong thing. This is on business connectivity services within SharePoint 2013. If you're not using SharePoint 2013, don't worry too much, because there's quite a lot of business connectivity services is the same in SharePoint 2010 as well, and we'll also be pointing out some of the things that are available to you within Office 365 also. So Penny, over to you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
My name's Penny Coventry. I've been working with SharePoint since 2001. That's SharePoint Portal Server 2001 and SharePoint Team Services. I've authored or co-authored in excess of 10 books now, all SharePoint related. I'm an independent consultant, but I do a lot of work for both Lightning Tools, and I do from time to time train for combined knowledge. I'm based in the UK, and I work anywhere. So that's me.
Fantastic, and yeah, quite a selection of books there, Penny, and there's a couple of those that we've worked together on as well.
Yes.
Okay, so a little bit about myself. My name is Brett Lonsdale. I'm the co-founder of Lightning Tools, and we've been around since the end of 2006, or actually formed the company in 2007, although we were working on products throughout 2006. I'm also one of the hosts of the SharePoint Pod Show, so if you haven't listened to that, there's some great interviews on there, some great recordings that will allow you to learn more about SharePoint. So you'll find that on SharePointPodshow.com, and you'll be able to download some interviews with SharePoint MVPs and Microsoft employees and just general SharePoint experts. I'm also one of the co-organisers of the SharePoint Saturday over here in the UK. If you're connecting from the States, you have a SharePoint Saturday, I think, nearly every week in a city somewhere. Because we're just this small, tiny little country, we tend to hold one once a year. And finally, just a little bit, if you want to get hold of me on Twitter or follow my tweets around business connectivity services or SharePoint in general, then I'm on at Brett Lonsdale. It's my Twitter handle. Lightning Tools also has one as well, which is at Lightning Tools, so you can look out for that. Penny, I think you're PJ Cov, is that right?
That's right.
Okay,
yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so throughout the session today, you'll be able to ask questions. You should find that inside your GoToWebinar software, there's the ability to raise your hand. So by default, everybody is going to be muted, but if you do want to ask a question, just raise your hand, we'll unmute you and you can ask the question. So that's the brave option, because you get to speak in front of about 100 other people. If you're shy, we are going to be monitoring Twitter as well, and we've set up a handle, so if you use the hashtag LTBCS, and we'll look out for any questions asked on there, and we'll do our best to answer those during the session, or if not, if we miss it for whatever reason, then we'll certainly reply to the tweet. And you can also email contact@lightningtools.com as well, so if you have any questions, we'll look out for them on there as well. Okay. So, first of all, we're going to have a high-level view of business connectivity services. What's it all about? What do we get from business connectivity services out of the box? And then we're going to go into each part of what we discuss here in a bit more detail. I'm going to be presenting some of it. Penny's going to be presenting some of the other. You're not going to get death by PowerPoint. You'll be pleased to know we use a different presentation software. I'm joking. No, a lot of it is going to be demonstrations, so we will be talking about a lot of the technology here within BCS, but there's going to be a lot of live demos as well. Okay, so that's a lot of things to go wrong, but hopefully that won't happen to us. We'll keep the demo gods away if we can. So first of all, the high-level view. So Business Connectivity Services is part of SharePoint, and I'm going to refer to SharePoint 2013 here. It was also available, as mentioned, in 2010, and prior to that, we had the Business Data Catalog in SharePoint 2007. If you remember that far back to SharePoint 2007, you may recall that the Business Data Catalog was only available with the enterprise version of SharePoint, so unfortunately not available to those of us that use SharePoint Foundations or SharePoint Server Standard. And also it was read-only. There was no external list or anything like that. You could literally just read the data. So that's where it's really evolved from. It's become Business Connectivity Services. You will see some BDC acronyms every now and again. You'll see one in my diagram here on the slide. And BDC doesn't actually stand for Business Data Catalog anymore. It stands for Business Data Connectivity. So don't get too confused with seeing the BDC acronym when that was Business Data Catalog back in 2007. So we're just going to use the diagram to discuss briefly what's available to us with BCS, and first of all we'll start off with the SharePoint Server side. So at the very top, what do we get from the SharePoint Server? First of all, we get a suite of web parts, and these web parts are really useful for building business data dashboards throughout your SharePoint environment. There's lots of web parts that we'll go into in a bit more depth later on, but we have, for example, the business data list web parts and business data related list web parts and so on. That the idea being is that we as developers or DBAs or whoever has made information available from external data sources made that information available to our users, and our users can add these web parts and design their own dashboards without having to worry about how do I actually connect to the data source and how do I authenticate with it and so on. That's all been done for them. So the if you like, the power users within SharePoint can configure their own pages using the web parts. Those web parts can be customized somewhat, and we'll be going through how that can be done. We also have the search. This is, in fact, the web parts and also the search are two things that are only available to enterprise customers. But the nice thing about the search is that not only can you search SharePoint content, such as SharePoint lists and library content, but you can also search your external content as well. So it doesn't matter if it's SAP or Oracle or Microsoft SQL data. Your users have one interface to search for things. So that's great. It's kind of in line with what we get from Bing and Google and so on, where you've got a single search box. You can search for a value and results can come from anywhere. Same sort of thing in SharePoint. We can get results coming from external websites, coming from Exchange public folders or document libraries and so on, and also external data as well. There's also something called the external data column that we'll be diving into, and that external data column can be used in any SharePoint list or library. It's a fantastic way of storing information along with a document or a list item. So you're really using that as metadata. So for example, we might create a proposal for a customer. We want to permanently store the name of the customer as the metadata along with the document. So rather than having I guess a mixed match of data, we can enforce some consistency by allowing users to look up the data from the external system. Instead of typing in a customer name such as LT for Lightning Tools or Lightning Tools, that would make it difficult to filter on. So being able to look up forces the consistency. We've also got the object model. So there's a server-side and a client-side object model that allows you to also get at the data and perhaps expose that via a web service or whatever you want to do. You can build your own custom web parts and so on. There's a user profile import as well, so you can go and connect to something like a human resources database and pull in a secondary user profile. It saves a lot of people time in populating their MySite profiles if you go and gather the information from an existing database. And finally, there's also the external list, which just like an internal list, it's just like a contacts list or a task list, but the data comes from outside of SharePoint. It's not stored inside the content database. So this is what we get on the server. On the client, there's great rich functionality with the Office client as well. So throughout Microsoft Outlook, you can bring information into there as contacts or as events, as posts, that sort of thing. Excel, you can take data from an external list and push it into Microsoft Excel. We can also bring data into Microsoft Access as well. So that allows us to take what's known as an external content type, something we'll explain later on, import that into Access, get hold of the data, and we can do reports, queries, forms, and that sort of thing over in Microsoft Access. There's also Visio, which gives us great capabilities to do things like gauges based on our external data. The SharePoint Workspace, which is deprecated now, but we could still use it if you want to take data offline. Quite a useful tool for that. And then we've also got Word and InfoPath as well. So again, we'll have a demonstration of Word at least, where you will be able to look up the external data within inside a Word document and populate fields based upon that, and similar functionality in InfoPath. So that's the functionality, and we're going to be going through a great deal of that. What makes it all work? Well, in the middle here we've got what's known as the Business Data Connectivity Runtime, and that is obviously the cogs that turn that allow us to get this data from the external system and into SharePoint. There's an authentication and authorization model that we'll be covering some of. There's different authentication options that you can see on screen here. We'll discuss those in a bit more detail later on as well, but it supports secure store, similar to single sign-on. Windows authentication, revert to self, and also if you're connecting to things like SQL or Oracle, you can send across a username and password as well to connect to it that way. So you can authenticate, and then we can also assign permissions to this data as well, to each external content type, and control who's allowed to execute that data and view it. We also have what's known as the external content type. That external content type describes the data that we're going to be bringing into SharePoint. So as far as the fields are concerned, what data types those fields are, and also the methods. So we're going to have different methods, such as a finder method that brings back all the data, and a specific finder that brings back a row of data, and so on. So all of that is encapsulated in this thing called a external content type. And once you develop that external content type, all of those properties and methods are written to a database called the metadata store. Okay, so we'll cover that in due course. Connectors, we've got OData, SQL, WCF, and .NET assemblies. So using SQL, we can connect to obviously an SQL database. Using OData, we can connect to anything published as OData. So there's SAP data that can be published out as OData. We have Dynamics CRM. The latest release allows you to connect via OData as well. So lots of things are being published as OData nowadays, so we can consume those connections and work with the data inside SharePoint. We've also got the WCF web services and .NET assemblies, and those can be developed by yourselves to expose data. Okay, so they're the connectors, but using those connectors, we can work out a way of pretty much connecting to most data sources, including Oracle and, like I said, SAP and that sort of thing as well. Okay, so that's really a high-level overview of what Business Connectivity Services is. And before we start seeing some demonstrations, a couple more slides just really on what business problems are resolved using Business Connectivity Services and who's involved in setting up Business Connectivity Services as well. What roles are going to be involved here. So business problems, it doesn't really matter how big or small your organization is. I've seen this many, many times where obviously you're going to go out and choose the best software to suit a specific problem inside your organization. So if you have a sales team, for example, you're going to look for some sort of CRM system. If you're going to connect to an account or set up an accounting system, you might go out and buy Sage or a Navision module or something like that. And obviously those tools do a specific job, but what we end up with is these silos of data throughout our organization and no one-stop shop to go and bring that data into one place. So if we wanted to build a dashboard, how do we perhaps bring in customers from CRM and those customers that owe us money from the accounting system? So one of the answers is obviously with SharePoint we can use BCS to connect to all of these different silos of data and bring them into one place, allowing us to search them, integrate them throughout Microsoft Office and build business data dashboards as well inside SharePoint. So our users can simply go and navigate to the site and see the information that's made available to them. That's going to cut down quite a deal on training requirements, so we don't have to sort of cross-department train people on different software. We don't have to bring our accountants up to speed with CRM and bring our salespeople up to speed with Sage as an example. So we can just point them at SharePoint and everybody can get the information from there. Okay. So who's involved in setting up BCS? I think Penny, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were going to go through this one.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Hi everyone, it's me back again. Yes, there's loads of people who need to be involved if you're going to make use of business connectivity services. You've got the SharePoint administrators. They've first of all got to create the business connectivity services application. And there's two components to that. There's a service application and a proxy that allows the business connectivity service application to actually talk to the web front end. So it's just like any other service application. You've also got to, the service SharePoint administrators have got to configure the security. There's several aspects to this security. There is the SharePoint server administrators who has to say who can create the external content types that are stored into the database that is associated with the business connectivity service application. Microsoft uses a terminology that's used in another service application for this database that's associated with the business connectivity services. You'll see in the central administration console that the database for the BCS is called the metadata store, and that's nothing to do with the metadata management service. It just happens that Microsoft has called this database the same name as another service application. And the SharePoint administrators have to say who can create external content types in that. They've also got to say who can read the external content types when they've been created. And we'll have a brief look at that as we go along. The SharePoint administrators have also got to configure search. That's if you do want SharePoint to crawl the data from the external system. So that's one side of it. Now the other side of it is the people who look after the external system. So if the external system is an SQL database or an Oracle database or a SAP system, then you will need those people who are involved in that to say who can actually access that external system. So by creating a BDC model or an external content type in SharePoint, you're not overriding the security in that external system. Then of course you've got to have the people who are going to create the external content types. Now there's several different mechanisms of creating that external content type. Basically it's just an XML file which you can read, and there's several tools that you can use it. So you have to have somebody who's going to use that tool. I've called it a SharePoint developer. It could be a business analyst. It just depends on the tool. You've also got the information worker, the end user, the person who's going to go to a site, who's going to create an external list, going to create an external column. You've also got people who are going to go to the external lists, or those lists with the external column. So you need to, they need to know how to interact with that external list or that external column. They are very much similar to internal lists and internal columns, but they are slightly different, and I will be demoing that next. So let's go on to the next slide, where we talk about the external list. So as I say, an external list is very much similar to an internal list. The internal list means that the data is saved internally to SharePoint. But the external list is based on an external content type, and when you display that external list, the data is coming from the external system. So we are not creating our own duplicate copy of the data from that external list. Now, depending on how the external content type is created, the external list could provide create, read, update, and delete functionality. Short, an acronym of CRUD. So again, it just depends on who actually defines that external content type. Now you can use the external list just like any other list. You can create views, you can filter using the column headings and sorting, you can customize the forms, you can even specify permissions at the list level, but you can't specify permissions at the item level, because remember, the data in that external list, so every list item in that list is not stored in SharePoint, so we cannot apply SharePoint security to each item. That data that we're displaying within SharePoint actually lives in the external system. If you want to specify security, then it depends on that external system how that security is done. Just like any other list, we can export to Excel. We can create something called event listeners, so we can enhance the experience out of the box. And all this functionality is available in SharePoint Foundation and in Office 365 with certain, yes, in all Office 365. So let's go on to the next slide. So an external column type means that you've got an internal list. It might be a contacts list, it might be a document library, it might be an announcements list. And what you want to do is allow people to choose values from the data that's held in the external list. You must all be used to internal lists and creating different columns, and from time to time you will want to create a column that you want to restrict what a person can actually choose as a value in that particular column. So you will be used to a choice column, or a lookup column, or a cite column. So an external data column is very similar to those types of columns, except that the data is not stored in another list. You're not embedding it, for example, in a choice column, you're not embedding the choices within the list itself. With an external data column, you're getting the values from the external system and then allowing the users to choose that value to store within the list. So when I was saying earlier on that with external lists, the data is not stored within SharePoint, when you are choosing a value to store in an external data column, then the data is cached in that particular column. So that's the only time that we would actually store the data from the external list. You can provide, as it says, powerful solutions by using external data columns. So shall we go on to the next slide? So what you can do when you create these external columns, you will get a new action menu. And on that action menu, you can provide custom actions. So you can say, right, okay, take some value from this particular item from the external system, pass it over to another page and get that other page to display information related to that value. And so that's what custom actions are all about. So now we're going to do a demo, and I'm going to show you those particular aspects. So I'm going to show you my screen. Okay. So here is a site I'm going to go to. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to create an external list. So you can create it just like any other list. So this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to click Site Contents, and then on the Site Contents page I'm going to click Add an App. So this is how you would create internal lists. External list does not appear under the noteworthy section, so it will appear underneath the other apps you can add, and I'm going to just sort it by name. And as I scroll down, you'll see that there is an app called an external list. So I'm going to click on that. And so just like any other list, I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call it Customers. Now, when you create an external list, you have to choose the external content type that you're going to create the list from. I've already created some external content types. So I'm going to click the far right icon, and that's going to bring me up the external type picker. And you can see here I've got a number of external content types that's been created. And by looking at the naming standards, I can say, oh yes, perhaps Northwind is my CRM system, and I can see that all my customers will be defined in this particular external content type. So I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to click Create. So just like any other list type, the only difference here, I'm specifying the external system that I'm creating my external content type from. So let's show it. All right. Depending on the external list, you might have to do some more configuration. Now, what I have got here, by creating this external list, because I created a number of something known as read list operations, and for every read list operation in my external content type, it's automatically created a view for each read list operation. The default one here is not showing anything because I've put some filters on it, and I'll show you later on how to create those filters. But we can see here I've got two other views, and if I click on one of those other views, I can see all the contents in that particular database. If I want to see all UK customers, then I click on another view. So again, another advantage of creating an external content type is that a user, when they create an external list, don't have to create all the views for themselves. You can already pre-create them for yourself. And so here we've got a number of them down here. Let me go back to the All Customers view. Now, the database that I'm using here is an SQL database. It's the Northwinds database, which is readily available to everybody. As I said, what we can do is we can actually filter. So I could scroll over here and I could filter on the country name. So I could filter and just show French customers. So that's just like any other list or library. I could sort. So I could sort them in city. I could amend this view. So I could go to the list option and I could modify the view. So even though this view was automatically created for me, when I created this external list, there's nothing to stop me from amending the view. So I could say, right, I want to sort it by company name. Perhaps I want to filter it. And I could also say group by. So let me group by country, and then let me group by city. So all the things that you'd expect from a particular list, and I could have configured it to display each of these groups as expanded or collapsed. What I can also do here is I can amend, because the external content type did define operations that allowed me to create new items in the external system or update them. So what I can do here, I can edit the item. So here I've got the around the horn. Just to prove to you that I am going to update the back-end system, I'm going to open up SQL, and you can see here I've already done a display of the contents in this particular database, and you can see here that there it is around the horn. I'll go back to my browser, and I'm going to say around SharePoint. And click Save. So it's showing me the amendments there, and if I now go back to SQL and I re-execute the statement, you should see here that it has in fact amended it in the database. And that's all because of the way I've created the external content type. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think we've just lost your... Oh no, sorry, we haven't. No, we're good. Might just be me. Okay. I thought we'd lost your screen for a moment, but we hadn't.
Okay, right. As I said, we can do most things we can do with a list or a library, but you will notice on the Items tab that there are certain things that are greyed out. So, for example, we cannot create a workflow on the external list. If you have a developer, you can do that. But out of the box, an external list doesn't automatically allow you to create a workflow on the items that are stored in that external list. We can also, before, we can't apply permissions at the item level, nor can we create alerts at the item level, but we could create alerts at the list level. So that's why you've got certain of those icons that are greyed. So for example, we can't create a new folder in our list or library. So let me go ahead and let's create now an external column. So here I've got an ordinary document library. I called it quotations. And you can see here I've got just the default columns, the name column, the modified column, and the modified by column. And I'm going to now add a new column here so that people can say, right, this document is associated with this customer. So up to library settings, I'm going to create a new column. So I'm going to call this customers. Now, if you are going to use quick parts, which Brett is going to demo quite soon, then make sure you don't call these column names the same names as the default metadata that you get with every single document. So here we have external data. Now you will see in number of pages that the business connectivity services, the external content type that we're going to be created, sometimes it will be called external data, sometimes it will be called line of business. That's probably a leftover from the SharePoint portal server 2007 when it was known as business data, but for now we've got external lists. It's now, in some other places, it's now called external data. So just like before when I was creating an external list, we get these two icons by the side, so I get the external content type picker. So again, I'm going to choose customers. And just like if you're choosing a lookup column for another list, you can specify which column you are going to allow people to see to choose from. So I'm going to say it's the company name. And then, just like a lookup column from another list, I can specify other columns I want to display in this list. So I'm going to say, well, it'd be useful for the person to see the contact name and their phone number and perhaps their country. So it's a good idea to decide here the columns that would be useful to the people who are coming to this list as part of their work. So at the moment it's blank because I haven't chosen a value for that particular column. So I'm going to choose that now. So if I knew my data very, very well, I could type it in and click check if that external item appears. But I'm going to again click the icon to the far right, and it brings me up with a picker. And again, depending on your external content type, depends if you get any filters. So I can say, right, okay, filter on perhaps the company name or filter on the country. Now the external list, just like any other list, has a limit as to how many items can be displayed. There's a threshold. Now, unlike internal lists, where the threshold, the throttling threshold is 5,000 items, for an external list, then it depends on your type of external data, but it's something, it's 2,000 items that you can display. However, this picker is limited no matter what type of external system you're displaying here, to only display 200 items. So when you're creating your external content type, you should make sure you provide users with a way of finding their data. So if your external system has got 5,000 items, you don't want to only ever show the first 200, because what they want to pick as a value for this field may not be in the first 200. So in this case, I've provided a mechanism, a filter mechanism, to say, please go to the external system and only bring me back items from the external system where the country is USA. And then I can say, oh yes, that's the customer I was looking for. So that's called the picker. So I can now save that. Now, when I defined that external column, I then said, right, yes, when you bring over the customer name, please bring over the values from these other columns in that table. So this is useful, that I can say, right, okay, if I need to phone up this customer, it's so-and-so I'm talking to, and that's their phone number. What you'll also see here is that I have got a little action menu, and what we've got here is these things called custom actions. Now I've already defined these, so we've got something called a profile page. So if the information about that customer, I haven't brought over enough columns, I can go to the profile page and I can display all the metadata about that particular customer. And if there are multiple tables that are associated with that customer, so for example there's an orders table, I can also on the profile page display all the orders to do with that particular customer. So it's not just the metadata columns to do with the customers table, I can also bring over items from other tables as well. As I say, there's the other mechanism I can do is I can define some other custom actions. So one of the ones I could define is saying, right, I want to go to this customer, so I want to find the location of that customer. So I'm going to do a Bing search with maps. I'm going to pass over the postal code, and hopefully in a minute, doesn't, oh, all right. It worked earlier on.
There it is, there's the demo gods. We knew they'd arrive at some point.
The demo gods. Yeah, that's only a small one. But normally what would bring up is it would bring up Bing for you. So as I say, when you create an external content type, you would have created it and it would have been stored up into the central administration console. So if we just have a look there, so this is the central administration website, and this is the business connectivity services page where we manage all the external systems. And you can see here are all the external content types that were defined. And if I go to the customer's external content type, and if I scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see there called Actions. And so here you can see there is an entry there of the profile page. And here are the other actions I've defined. So if I go to the Bing Maps, you can see here there's the HTML. I'm passing over a parameter. I can have many parameters. I've only got one parameter. And on this page, we can start counting parameters from 0. And I'm going to map the 0 parameter to the postal code, and that's why I would pass over the postal code to Bing. So I can develop as many custom actions as I like. That capability of defining custom actions you can do yourself within your business, your BDC model with some of the tools. Some of the tools you would always have to ask the SharePoint administrator to configure those for you. So I think that's all I've got to do to demo here. So if you would like to continue on, Brett, with the PowerPoint.
Yep, no problem. Okay, that's not them.
It says you have control.
Yep. Yeah. Go to meetings being wonderful right now. Let me just see if I can maybe to just stop showing my screen and then share it again.
Ah, yes, it's coming.
It doesn't want to show my second screen, but that's okay. I'll just drag this onto my first screen so you can see it that way. Okay, we should be good. All right, so yeah, what I'm going to show you is the business data web parts, and so we discussed these briefly earlier on. The business data web parts are the same web parts that have been around for quite some time throughout SharePoint 2010, and were also introduced in 2007 Enterprise as well. You do have them available to you in Enterprise of SharePoint 2013. So if you are using SharePoint Foundations or SharePoint Standard, you're not going to see the BDC web parts, but don't let that concern you, because you do get things like the external list as well. So my screen's just, I think it's finally caught up with what I wanted to do. Okay, so the web parts are available with the Enterprise only, and also through Office 365 as well if you're using the E3 or the E4 editions. They are read-only, but again you do have the external list if you want to be able to create items, edit items, and delete items, as Penny showed you. So what these are really used for is building some great looking dashboards of information that also maintain the schema of the database in the back end as well. So if you've got a one-to-many relationship, you can maintain that same one-to-many relationship inside your SharePoint environment. There is a bit of a downside for SharePoint 2013, and that is the lack of the Design tab in SharePoint Designer. What we used to be able to do with with SharePoint Designer is use the Data View web part easily to be able to format the data inside these BDC list web parts. So, for example, if you wanted to apply some conditional formatting or just do some data formatting, that sort of thing, you could simply open up your page inside SharePoint Designer and start manipulating the web part, because all in all, this web part is basically a data view web part. So the Design tab has gone. You can still use the SharePoint Designer tool to customize these, but it does mean that you're going to have to do that in XSLT. So there's two places where you can customize them. One is actually inside the browser using XSLT, or with inside SharePoint Designer as well. So that's a bit of a backward step. Hopefully later on we can show you a workaround for that. The web parts can also be connected. So if you've built associations between your external content types, so in other words built an association between, say, customers and orders for a one-to-many relationship, and then also maybe orders to order details and so on, you'll be able to replicate that that relationship inside SharePoint and have people navigate your web parts by perhaps selecting a customer and seeing the orders related to that customer and so on. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just dive in and have a look at those web parts before we move on to the next section. So here on my page, I've basically got 3 of the out-of-the-box web parts, and I'm going to configure these from scratch in just a moment. I just wanted to show you the end result first. So it looks as though I've got a little drop-down arrow, which you would expect inside an external list, or say a document library or SharePoint list, but it doesn't allow me to edit the items like you would do inside an external list. All I can see here is my custom actions. So I've got a search customer, and if we keep our fingers crossed, the demo gods haven't got my environment, we should be able to search the customer that I had selected there. And there we go. So lesson learned, use Google, not Bing. There we are, Penny. So you can see, so I'll get shot for that. So it's here you can see we're doing a search on that particular customer name, and the end user didn't have to open up Google or Bing and type in the value. All we do is just hit the drop down and search the customer using the custom action. So you can call the custom actions from the web parts, and there's also the view profile as well, which you can optionally go and create a profile page, and that will also show you your associated data, as again Penny pointed out. So we can see the one side of the join here on the profile page is my customer, and then all the orders related to that customer show inside a related list web part, and that all happens automatically when you create the profile page. You don't have to build those web parts; they're there for you anyway. Okay. We've also got the web parts connected here, so I can select a customer. We've got the little icon on the left that allows me to select the customer. So that shows me the orders across on the right-hand side, and if I select one of those orders, we'll also be able to see the order details on that order as well. Okay, and if you can see in the bottom right hand side of my screen where I've got unit price, that's a great example of where we might want to do a little bit of data formatting. The data from from SQL has come into SharePoint, and formatting a price as 4 decimal places. So we might want to put the currency symbol in there, we might want to format it to 2 decimal places, as well as do some other formatting like conditional formatting and so on. So in order to do that, you do need to go into XSL, unfortunately. Having said that, the web parts can be customized somewhat. We can go to the page ribbon, edit the page, and you can customize them as far as clicking the drop down arrow here at the top, choosing edit web part first of all, and once we've done that we get the edit view link, and by clicking the edit view link we get to pick and choose which columns we want to display. We can set the item limit as well for pagination and so on, or if you just wanted to show something like the top 10 customers based on your sort criteria as well, you could do that, and you can also apply a filter to the content. Now the filter you can do in two different ways. What you'll learn later on is when we're creating the external content type, the finder method or the read list method that goes and gets all of the rows and all of the columns can have filters built in. Again, Penny showed the by country or the by company name filter inside the picker, and what we'd be able to do is if we had those filters in place, we could select the value for those filters at the top, whether it's going to be specified by the user using a small toolbar at the top of the web part, or if it's going to be set by you hard coding a value. So you'd be able to set something like UK as the country or US as the country, and that would be hard coded. So that's based on the actual finder method that goes and gets the data. The other filter at the bottom here is more of a in-browser type filter. It's going to be processed after it's gone and got the data from the SQL Server. Okay, so you can customize, as I said, the columns here. So I could trim this right back, get rid of some of this unwanted information, so I can save some real estate on the page. So I can get rid of things like phone, fax, postal code, maybe even city, address, and region. We could trim it right back so we're seeing just a bit of summary data. So you can see that we've got that displayed here now. And there's another web part that we could add on the page, which is called the BDC item web part. So I'm just going to go and add that. So if we go to the insert ribbon, click onto web part, under the business data category, we've got the business data item. Now this web part we've actually already seen. It was on the profile page and works in conjunction with the business data item builder web part. And what basically happens is the business data item builder goes and grabs from the URL the identifier for a row, so something like the customer ID, and it passes that value via a web part connection to the business data item web part. We don't have to worry about that on the profile page. Like I said, all of those web parts are built for you. But I'm going to add a business data item web part here onto my page. Open up the tool pane, which will allow me to configure it. And over on the right hand side here, I can select my type. The type being the external content type that we'll be creating a little bit later on. So I can select customers, so it's nice and easy for the end user to do, and we can choose a view if we want to, and we can also choose an item. And selecting the item will actually give me all of the items, but it will be a fairly boring web part if it just displayed the same item all of the time. So what we're going to do is cancel that and just hit apply. Okay, so we don't know which item we want to display as yet. So what I can do in order to get the item is hit the drop down arrow on that web part and go to connections and get the item from the business data list web part. Okay, so I'll point it to that. Okay, so we can see that it's now connected to my customer list, and I'll save and close the page. Okay, and as we click onto a particular row, not only do we see the orders related to that customer, and we can display the order details related to that customer, but we also get all of the columns displayed in a smaller web part as well. Okay, so even though we've trimmed the information that's shown in the BDC list web part, it is possible to select it to show more details, more information. And you can style this so that it looks a lot better than what we're looking at here. You can change this icon using some Excel if you wanted to, so it becomes more intuitive to your users, so they actually get something like a more info button or something along those lines. And the business data item web part also shows your custom actions. So there's the search customer again, or the view profile, so they can trigger those from there as well. Okay, so there is a suite of web parts available, as I mentioned. So they're just inserted from the web part ribbon under business data, and not all of these are business data connectivity web parts or business connectivity services web parts, such as the Excel Web Access and Visio Web Access. They're not like the KPI web parts aren't. But basically anything beginning with the words business data are all BDC. So we've seen the business data item and item builder. The business data list and the related list are, well, this is a business data list where my customers are coming from. Related list is the orders and the order details. What you also have is BDC filter web parts. So you can add these onto the page and pass a filter value through to the other web parts as well. So that again becomes a great dashboard tool, so you can do things like filter by month or filter by customer and that sort of thing as well. Okay, so those are the BDC web parts. What I'm going to move on to now is some of the Office client integration. So the Office client integration kind of touched on a little bit earlier, and again Penny mentioned it. Really, the Office client integration comes from several different places. You've got the integration from an external business data column that Penny showed you inside a document library. You've also got it from the external list, so as far as getting data into Excel or Outlook, you can do that from within the external list. But we could also go and connect to that data via InfoPath, Visio, or Microsoft Access, and so on as well. So what we'll do is we'll start off taking a quick look at Excel. So I'm just going to go back to SharePoint, and I've got an external list here called Customers, and on the list ribbon you'll notice that we've got an Export to Excel button. So I can simply click onto that button and choose Open from my browser, and that will open up the data in Excel. So we just need to click onto Enable, and there's the data. So it comes through formatted as a table, and we can now start to manipulate that data throughout Microsoft Excel. So very quick and easy for anybody to do, really, and you've also got the ability to filter it and so on and so forth in there because it's formatted as a table. It does give you a one-way sync, but that's just from the external list through to Excel and not vice versa. Okay. The other thing that you can do from the external list is connect to Outlook. Now you might be looking at your own SharePoint environment at the moment and think, well, I can't see that connected to Outlook button anywhere, and that is because you need to enable a feature to be able to see that. So if I just go into the site settings, under the site actions we've got manage site features, and there's a feature in here. It says staring at a list of features. It's right at the top. Here we are. The Office synchronization for external lists. So the default is that is deactivated. So I'm just going to deactivate that feature again, and you'll notice when I go into my external list, we no longer have the Connect to Outlook button. So that's the default. You're not going to see it unless you enable that feature. Now, it also won't really do anything unless you've described what behavior that external content type should have when you click onto the Connect to Outlook button. So when you're designing your external content type, you'll be able to specify the type of data, so whether it's a contact, whether it's a event, or whether it's a post, and so on, and we'll be touching on that when we create the external content type shortly. But we then have to map some columns. So if we're taking the data through to Outlook as contacts, for example, we would map our first name to first name, last name to last name, and so on for all of the Outlook column types, so that the data can be displayed in Outlook as contacts. Okay, so there's a couple of bits of Office integration. What I'm going to do here is also go into the document library. So I've already created a external business data column like Penny showed you. What I've also done is gone and created a document template. So when we go to the library ribbon, sorry, the files ribbon even, and I choose to create a new document, you'll notice that Word opens up, and I've got the document information panel at the top inside Word that shows me all of the columns that I can complete. But I've also got on the page what's known as a quick part, and those quick parts make for a great way of looking up data from your external system. So if I wanted to send a letter to a customer, all I need to do is look up that customer from within Word, click onto OK, and all of my columns are completed for me, and then I can just print the letter and send it off to them. Notice also the document information panel has been completed based on filling that out inside the Word document, and now I can just give this a title, save my document, so that's going to save out to my document library, close down Word, and my browser should automatically refresh. If not, I'm just going to help it along its way, and there's our document with all of the metadata stored within it. So that metadata actually does get stored with the document. It's not linked to it as you would get with the external list. So if the data changed in the back-end system, you're not going to see the data change here unless you click the refresh indicator, in which case it will go through all of the documents and refresh the data back to what's stored inside the inside the database. Yeah. So in order to create that, very straightforward. What I'll do is just go through and create a new document again. So ignoring the template, we'll just delete everything that's on there. You've already seen Penny create the external the external sorry, I'll get my words out in a moment. The external data type. All I need to do is open up a blank document, and on the insert ribbon there's these quick parts. So I hit the drop down and there's the document property. So it'll show you all of the metadata available from that document library, and here is all the things prefixed with customer. So I've got the customer company name. In fact, before that, sorry, we just need customer. So I've got the customer on there, and then I can go through and insert things like the company name and the contact name and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, you can't go and select them all in one go. That would have been too easy. But we can create our letter and so on, and now it's just a simple case of looking up the data from within inside Word. So very powerful feature, saves your end users a lot of time, and also ensures that the data that you're collecting along with your documents remains consistent. Okay. The only other thing I did to make sure that that was available for newly created documents was, instead of creating a new document from the library, I went to the library settings, and under advanced settings you can actually edit the document template that's associated with the document library there as well. Okay, so that's some of the integration, and what I'm going to do is move on to search, and this is me, right, Penny?
No, sorry?
I can't remember who's doing search, you or I?
You're doing search.
I'm doing search, okay, fantastic. Alright, so search, we talked about it a little bit earlier on, the fact that you can not only use and display data inside SharePoint, but you can also search the data as well. So what I'm going to do is just show you the end result, and then we'll have a look at how that's configured and set up. So I'm going to jump to my search site, and in here on the search site I can simply search for any part of the customer information, unless something goes wrong. So, okay, that's not too happy with that. Now I have a witness that Penny saw this working earlier on.
Yes, I did.
Let's try that. No, our search doesn't want to work. Okay, well let's see if we can fix it by having a look at how to configure search. So once you've created your external content type, what we can do is go through the farm search administration. What you'll find is you've got a search service application, so I can select that from here and click onto content sources, and that's the first thing that we would need to create in order to start indexing our external data. So you can see here we've got a new content source called Northwind, and if I hit the drop down, notice that we can start a full crawl or an incremental crawl to bring back the data. I can have a look at the crawl log as well, and that shows you how many successes there are, meaning how many items have been indexed, and it would tell you if there was anything wrong as far as errors or warnings are concerned. So they're easy to create. From the content sources, we just click New Content Source, provide it a name. So I could call this Northwind 2, since I've already got Northwind, and we point it to line of business data. As Penny mentioned, you still see the old MOS or SharePoint 2007 wording every now and again, so there it is. And we can either crawl the entire business data connectivity or some specific external content type. So I can choose just Northwind customers and tell it to do a full crawl, and it will start to crawl that content. Okay, so it's saying it's already being used in there, which is correct. It's just not working for some reason. But what we'll do is we'll just start a new incremental crawl and see if that makes a difference. Try it one more time. No, it unfortunately doesn't want to show that, so apologies for that. But basically what would happen here, we'd be able to see the search results, click onto a search result, and it would open up the profile page. So it's not going to open up the actual back-end system or anything like that. It will just show that in a profile page with any related data as well. Okay, so as you can see on the slide shot, this is what you would see. The name of your profile page displays in the result. You click onto that and it would open it up, but you'll be able to search on any of the columns and also refine them as well. Okay, Penny,
Right,
show us how this all happens.
Yeah, how to build an external content type. So while we're waiting for my screen to come up, we have got one question here, Brett, that says, is the webinar going to be recorded and will it be available somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are recording the session. We'll edit out obviously all the bits that don't work and so on. But yeah, we'll be posting that up on our site. So if you go to our site, you'll find there is a webinars section from the main menu, and you'll be able to see previous webinars there, but also this one.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you how to create an external content using SharePoint Designer. Now, SharePoint Designer is only just one tool you can use to create the external content type. As I said earlier, the external content type is based off of some XML that is defined in something also known as a BDC model. So you could theoretically, if you were brave about it, create the BDC model using Notepad, or you could use SharePoint Designer or Visual Studio, or a tool from Lightning Tools called the BCS MetaMan. But I'm going to use SharePoint Designer. Now you can, this ability to create the external content type was available in SharePoint 2010. So if you're using SharePoint 2010 still, either SharePoint Foundation or SharePoint Server, whether it's the Standard or Enterprise Edition, then you could use SharePoint Designer 2010. And the process is not very dissimilar from SharePoint Designer 2013. But I'm going to be using 2013 because that's my machines. Now, to connect up, to create your external content type, you need to connect up to your back-end system. once you've created your external content type, you need to specify how users, when they create an external list or when they're using the external data column, or if they're using one of the BDC business data web parts, how are users going to connect up to that external system? So you could say, right, okay, whoever's been connected, whatever users' credentials are when they open up a SharePoint site, it's those credentials that are going to be passed over to the external system. Now, the problem with that, and that's known as integrated security, is that works okay if the external system is on the SharePoint box. Now, in production, you can't have the SharePoint web front ends with every SharePoint web front end with that external system. So intermittently, your system would work and then it wouldn't work, depending on which web front end joined it. Because if you're using just NTLM, then the user's credentials can only pass one hop. One hop. That's one hop from the user's browser on their desktop to the SharePoint front end. It cannot be passed from the SharePoint server to a second hop. So as I said, if the external system was on the same box as the SharePoint server, it doesn't need a second hop and it will work. If the external system is not on the SharePoint server, then the user's credentials cannot move over. Now, this is nothing particular to do with business connectivity services. This is just what NTLM is allowed to do. So there's a workaround. Well, there's not a workaround. There's a better way, which is to use Kerberos, because Kerberos doesn't pass over credentials, it passes over tickets. Or what you can do are you could use something known as revert to self, which in Network Designer is known as the BDC identity. And this means that instead of passing over the user's credentials, the person who is signed on to SharePoint, you would be using, if this was SharePoint 2010 or 2013, the user ID that's used for the BCS service application. Now, by default, this is not recommended because that means everybody is using that credentials. Those credentials for the BCS service application has got a lot more security than any other user ID that the user may have. And also, so therefore Microsoft has by default disabled the ability to use revert to self. That used to be available in SharePoint 2010 and in SharePoint 2007. But if you still want to use that, as I say, it's not recommended, then you would need to use PowerShell to enable you to choose that. You could get around this by not using Windows authentication at all, whether it's NTLM protocol or Kerberos, but you could use the inbuilt security mechanism of the external system if that external system has got its own security mechanism. So for example, the SQL database by default is configured when you install it to use integrated mode. But way back, before SQL Server could use integrated mode, it had its own mechanism of having user IDs and passwords. So you could reactivate that, and that's called mixed mode. Now your SQL database administrators might not like that. The disadvantage with that is that your user IDs and passwords would be passed over the network in clear text. So you would have to use some other mechanism of securing the connection between your SharePoint servers and your back-end system, like IPsec and something like that. As I said, you're going to have quite a fight on your hands to do that. Now the other method is to use Secure Store, which is a capability within SharePoint which maps the user's credentials that's been used to sign on to SharePoint and maps them to some other credentials which are then passed on to the back-end system. And that is the preferred mechanism. When we create our external content type, we're going to create a number of methods. In SharePoint Designer, the name for methods is called operations. If you're using Visual Studio, they're called methods. If you're using Visual Studio, for example, they'll be called finder, specific finder, creator, whatever. In SharePoint Designer, they're called read list, read item, and so on. So again, different terminology meaning the same sort of thing. When we define our external content type, we have to specify what type of fields we've got, what are primary keys, the filters, the custom actions, whether we're going to use our external content type for Outlook so that we display our contacts as a contacts list perhaps, and the name of the title. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to create an external content type. I mentioned earlier that when you create an external content type, you have to have permissions on the BCS metadata store to store the external content type and that's all controlled by the central administration console. And you can, once you've created your external content type, you can say which of the operations or methods people are allowed to use. So again, that is something you define using the central administration console. So I'm going to open up SharePoint Designer. Now it doesn't really matter which site you open up in SharePoint Designer because remember your external content types are being saved into the BCS database. And there's only one BCS database for your file. Theoretically, you could create multiple BCS service applications, but all the web parts, all the external lists, all the SharePoint Designer only looks for the BCS service application. That's the default one. If you're going to create custom code, then you could create a second one. So in your SharePoint Design in the navigation pane, I'm going to click External Content Types. You can already see that I've got a number of external content types defined. These external content types are grouped by their namespace. Each external content type is unique based on its external content type name together with its namespace. The namespace, as I say, you should use as a description of your external content type. So you might like to group together all the external content types coming from one external system, and you might also want to use the namespace to quickly identify those external content types that you define, that you created using SharePoint Designer, and those ones you created using, for example, like it was Managed Metadata Service. And that's what I've done here. So all the ones with a namespace of that, and it's just a name, it looks like a URL, but don't worry, it's just a name, were all defined, all created by SharePoint Designer. All the ones using Northwind_MetaMan were all created using BCS MetaMan. So I'm going to create a new one. So up on the external content types ribbon in the new group, I'm going to create external content types. Now I have two windows to help me configure or create an external content type. One of them is called the summary view, and then on the ribbon, if I click Operation Design View, that helps me define my operations. As I say, operations, if you're using Visual Studio, are known as methods. So let me go to the summary view. The first thing you need to do is give your external content type a name. I'm going to call this demo customers. And I'm going to give the display name a space. Okay. As I said, you can choose your namespace. By default, it's going to choose the URL of the site where you're going to create this external content type. Just because I created this external content type from this site doesn't mean I have to come back to this site to amend it. Right? So I always recommend to change that namespace to be a bit more meaningful. If this external content type is you want it to display its data within Outlook, then in the Office type, you need to specify what type of data you've got. So my customers are going to be a contact list. Okay. And now I'm going to now decide which external system I'm going to create this external content type from. So I'm going to click where it says click here. So I'm now taken to the operation design view. I've already got to define some data sources. If the data source hasn't already been created, then I would click Add Data Source. Now, in SharePoint Designer, I can choose one of these data sources to define. There is, as Brett says, there's the OData data source, but in SharePoint Designer, we cannot create an external content type from that data source. So they are the limits of the data sources we can create here with SharePoint Designer. So I'm going to click OK. No help here. You need to know your backend system. So you need to talk to your database administrator or your business analyst and say, what is the external system? Where is it? What server is it on? So I happen to know it's on that. You have to know your database name. No help here. If you misspell it, it's not going to give you any useful information. You're now going to specify how you're going to connect up to that user identity. Now, when you create an external content type with SharePoint Designer, you can't save the external content type until you've defined some operations. So you can't create any operations until you've connected up to the backend system. So when it's talking about here, connecting up to this backend system, this is to allow you to define your operations. At this moment in time, you are going to go straight from SharePoint Designer to your backend system, okay? Because at the moment we haven't saved it back to SharePoint. So SharePoint Designer is not going via SharePoint to the backend system. We're going direct to that backend system. So we could define an ECT here, and yet when we create an external list on SharePoint, we will find sometimes that we can't actually see the data, and that's because you haven't defined in the central administration console that you can actually access the external content type using the browser. So once we've created that, you can see here I've got Northwind down there, and I can see the tables, I can see the views, and I can see any stored procedures. Now again, your business analyst or your SharePoint DBA might prefer you to use stored procedures, that's better security, than use tables. But I'm going to use tables. Now I right button click the table that I'm going to base my external content type on. And I'm going to define the type of operations that this external content type is going to be defined on. If you're going to create an external list or you want to use search to actually crawl the external system, you must define a read item operation and a read list operation. I'm going to create all of them, all at the same time. Right, okay. So I've already got that defined. So let me go back. So let me go to this one then. All right, let me choose a different one. Let me remove that one. So let me start again. So I'm going to create all operations to do with this particular table. So it leads you through a wizard. So first of all, you have to specify, so these are the parameters that are coming from your backend system. So these are the columns in your table. Now you must always specify an identifier. So this is a primary key. If you don't specify identifier, then down the bottom here you will see a list of errors. Okay. So you can see here that SharePoint Designer is quite intelligent, and that particular checkbox for the custom ID was already selected. If you want to make your columns user-friendly, then you can alter the display name. Now this display name is only shown in the people picker. This does not affect the column names that are created in your views. As I say, some of this is a legacy of when BDC was created for 2007, but it hasn't been updated for external lists. So what you change here as I say, doesn't affect the columns in your views, but it affects the column names in the picker. So I could go along and I could put a space in each of them. Now, because I specified that this particular external system is in fact contact names, and therefore I do want to save these contact names in Outlook and then perhaps phone them when I'm offline, I need to map each of these values to a particular Office property so that Outlook knows how to present them. Now, you must define at least a full name mapping, so I must choose one of the columns that are coming from the external system to an Office property for full name, or I can choose last name. And so that's where I've got an error message, definitely a red cross message that I won't be able to save this external content type until that particular configuration is completed. You can see here that the finish key is still grey. So I'm going to choose the contact name as mapping to the Office full name capability. And once I've done that, you can see that the error message has gone. I can then map all the rest of the stuff. So that's business name. Where is it? Company name. Okay. And then I can do address to business address, city to business city, region. I'm going to do that to state because you can see here that region here is country. So I'm going to do that to state, postal code to postal code, country to country region, phone number to business phone number. And you can see as I choose each one, I can't choose it again. So the ones that I've chosen have been disappeared. So there's the business telephone number, and we've got business fax. And all this does is help Outlook know how to format the data when we're displaying it in Outlook. So where's the fax number? There it is. So I've done that. Now also on this page, I can say which of the columns I'm going to display in the picker. This was that picker that displayed all the customer names. If I do not choose columns to be shown in the picker, then by default all the columns are going to be displayed in the picker. Now that picker is not very big, wide, so I would suggest you just choose those columns that enable users to uniquely identify the correct row. So in my case, I'm going to display in the picker the company name and perhaps the city name and perhaps the contact name. Okay, so that's that page. Now I can choose filters. So this allows me, as I said, if you've got greater than I think it's 1,000 items in your external system, in your table, then you need to specify these filters here, because otherwise you just get a message saying that no data is being displayed. It's not like an internal list that tells you that you've hit the threshold, so it's not a friendly list. So you as an external content type creator have a certain responsibility here. So that's fine. So I've created all those. Now, if I have got another external, so that's how to create this one, and if I've got other external content types, I can create an association to this external content type so that I can display information like Brett showed you, that on one page you can have connected web parts and you can select on one web part and then show the data in another web part. But before I finish here, as I say, when I created the add connection, I specified how SharePoint Designer was going to connect up to the external system. But of course, that may not be the way that I want the external content type when it's being used by SharePoint to connect up to that external system. So I'm going to flip over to the summary view, and then here on the ribbon I've got another command that says edit connection properties. So I can here specify which authentication method I actually want the external content types to use when SharePoint is using it to decide what data to pull back. And here we've got the user identity, which is Windows integrated authentication. That's pass-through, which you could have the double hop issue with. We've got the BDC identity, which is the revert to self, which is not enabled by default. By selecting it here will mean it won't work until you've done that PowerShell. Or you can do the impersonation. Now impersonation means that you're going to use the secure store service. So again, it's learning the terminology that's being displayed to you in the user interface. So I'm going to use that as leave that as user identity, as my SQL server is installed on my SharePoint server, so I don't get the double hop issue. You might have noticed here that I've got two tabs. The default tab is that you're going to be creating the external content type, or the BDC model, for use within SharePoint. The client option allows you to create the external content or the BDC model, the file, the XML file, for use within Access. So that Access can directly connect up to that external system. When you're creating this external content type with SharePoint, and when you click the Save option, it's being saved into the Business Connectivity Services database, the metadata store. Now, if you wanted to export this, so perhaps you were developing it up on a development system, you would need to export the BDC model and then import it into the production system. If you created it using SharePoint Designer, you need to export it out using SharePoint Designer. You'll also notice here on the summary view, we've got a summary of the permissions that's allowed from the external content type. So that's very useful to know. We can't configure it in SharePoint Designer, but we can see how it has been configured. So we can see who has access. We can also see down here the column names and also the field types that are being used here. And we've got here a subset of the read list of the operations. If I have a look at another one I created earlier, you can see that I've got several read lists, and if I have a look at the orders external content type, and I've got down here an association. So I have created an association from the orders external content type to the customer content type. So before you create the profile page, as we said, if you're using the Enterprise Edition of SharePoint Server or E3 or E4 of Office 365, then you can get SharePoint Designer or the Central Administration Console to build your own profile page. So I always recommend that you always create all your read lists and all your associations before you create your profile page. And here in SharePoint Designer, it's as quick as clicking that. It creates your profile page. It puts all those business data web parts on there for each of the associations immediately related to this. So that's, I think I've done everything now,
yeah.
Brett.
Okay.
So if you'd like to take over.
Sure. Okay, so thank you very much, Penny. Again, apologies everybody for the audio dropping just there. So Penny's showing you how you can use SharePoint Designer to create the external content types and save those directly to the metadata store that we talked about earlier. You can use Visual Studio if you want to connect to anything else, but obviously that means writing the code. So if you wanted to connect to say Oracle or anything else, then you can do that. What I'm going to do is show BCS Metaman, which is a tool of ours, and we'll use that to create a connection to Oracle. Or of course you could use Notepad as well, which is something that we had to use back when SharePoint 2007 first came out, and develop an XML file from scratch. So let's jump into the Metaman tool. So with the BCS Metaman, we can simply connect to multiple data sources in a similar way that you could use SharePoint Designer, but we can connect to other bits and pieces without having to write code, like OData or ODBC data sources. So there's many different data sources supported here, like MySQL, Microsoft Access, and Firebird, and so on. We can also connect to SQL or Oracle is another one that we could connect to directly. So there's multiple different data sources, as I mentioned, and we can create our connection. Of course, I think losing audio has got me all flustered there. Okay, let's switch back to a SQL one, since we probably won't have that. So I can easily build the connection from my tables and drag and drop onto the design surface the tables that I want to connect to, and easily go through and build the different methods. So these operations that Penny was talking about can be created simply by clicking onto the method that we want to go ahead and create. And some of those things that are more complicated in SharePoint Designer, such as associations, can be done quite easily just simply by dragging and dropping a connection like you would do in something like SQL or Microsoft Access, and setting the primary and foreign keys. So here we can very easily start to visualize the data that we're going to be bringing through into in SharePoint, and also preview that data as well prior to actually importing it. So that's one area that we can help out on. If you don't want to just simply connect to SQL, perhaps you've got an Oracle server or a MySQL server or something like that you want to connect to. There's also Metaman that can provide that, and you can deploy directly to SharePoint, just like you can with SharePoint Designer for either SharePoint 2010 or 2013. You basically set the name of the model that you want to create, and you can hit deploy at the bottom, and that will go through and generate the connection. If you did want to do it by hand, just to show you, hopefully put you off here, what we can do is overwrite the BDCM file that I had on my desktop, and what this looks like is a few hundred lines of XML that you would need to write, and SharePoint's not very forgiving for the slightest error in here when you go to import it. So that's basically what you would need to do manually if you were to connect to something via the XML. Okay, a couple of products that also work with it that overcome some of the BCS limitations. One of them is the data viewer web part, and what we did discuss earlier with the external list was the fact that you can find it difficult to format the data. Again, you have to use XSLT now. So what we have here is a couple of web parts that can also help you out. One of them is the data viewer web part. So as you can see, we've got some conditional formatting going on, and the way that that can be configured is simply by going through to the web parts wizard. You can connect to multiple different data sources. So we have a direct connection to SQL or direct connection to Oracle. We can connect to a SharePoint list if we want to, or again OData. But also, if you've gone to the effort of building the Business Connectivity Services external content type, you can select that, and under the Data Source tab, specify the name of the name of the external content type that you want to use. So that's available by clicking the drop down. So notice here I've got my customers, orders, order details, and employees, and so on. And we go through and set the finder method, the creator method, the updater, and the deleter method. Once you've done that, the columns become available to you. You've got a simple drag drop interface for reordering the columns. You can filter them very easily, and clicking onto the Display tab allows you to do things like formatting the data. So we can do column aliases, which is nice. We could also do the number formatting if we wanted to do that, and also you can format the fore color and back color and so on for that cell, as well as apply conditional formatting to the data as well. So, so conditional formatting, you just click the icon and straight away you can apply some conditional formatting with lots of different values and conditions. So here I could, for example, put in the USA and add that one to it as well. And let's save that, and we should see the conditional formatting applied. So fairly straightforward. What we've also got is the chart web part, and that really exists for several reasons. One, the SharePoint out-of-the-box chart web part, which was quite complicated to use in 2010, has been deprecated, so no longer available. So we provide a chart web part as well that we can go through, edit the chart, and that again can connect to SharePoint lists out of the box. You can also connect to business connectivity services or Excel, Oracle databases and so on, and same sort of thing applies. You would select the external content type and specify which columns you want to build your chart on. And as you go through, you can view the data that you're bringing back from BCS. You can select the fields that you want to be incorporated into your chart. You can also do things like select the chart type, so there's single series, multiple series, stacked charts and so on that are available to you. And you can also specify things like drill down, so what happens when you click the chart? Do you display another chart that's more detailed, or do you display the data in place of it, and so on. So you'll notice here, as we click onto the chart, we do get to preview the data that's coming from BCS, and the charts on the page here allow you to build a very powerful dashboard, and you've got the same sort of data available to you within pie charts and column charts and so on as well. Okay, so that's just an area where Lightning Tools can help with three different products for business connectivity services, and so they are the data viewer, the MetaMan product, and also the chart web part. So I think that concludes our demonstration, Penny. So again, apologies for the issue with the audio halfway through, but hopefully what you've been able to do is get a good introduction to business connectivity services. And I guess, Penny, do you have any good resources available for continued learning with BCS?
Well, we've got our book. It's on SharePoint 2010, but a lot of it is still applicable to here. Yep. There are some other people who have recently done presentations at the SharePoint conference and at TechEd, and their videos, the videos of their sessions are available on Channel 9, so they're always good to look at. So that was by Fabian. So he's more of a developer-orientated session, so that would be worth looking at if you wanted to extend the out-of-the-box capability. And then there was one by Tom Riesling, which was a combination of what we've just shown plus a little bit of a developer one. So they're very good as well.
Yeah. Okay, so once again, I mean, if you do have any questions now, Penny and I would be more than happy to answer them. So we know that you've got a question, if you could raise your hand using the GoToWebinar software, or if you wanted to send out a tweet, again, it's at Brett Lonsdale and at PJCov, or you can email us, and we do actually have a raised hand. So, so that's from, hopefully I'm pronouncing the name right, it's Anitha Muta. So Anitha, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, how do we create filters in the MetaMan?
Okay, so how can you create the filters in MetaMan?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the filters can be created very easily. So using the MetaMan tool, what you're able to do is go in and right-click and choose Configure the entity, and from here you can click onto the Methods tab, and there's your method, so that like the Finder method is available to you, and at the bottom is the filters, so we can go through and add limit filters, wildcard filters, and comparison filters. So if I wanted to create a wildcard filter, I could give it a name for something like country, choose my column that I want that filter to be based on, and provide the default value as well, and just hit save, and that's a filter created. Okay, so yeah, there's the three types of filters that you can create. The limit filter, I think Penny mentioned, is very useful to bring back a subset of data, especially with the limitations of the external list. And you've also got the wildcard or the comparison filter if you wanted to compare it with a specific value. Okay, does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Would this?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Would this session be recorded and sent to us? Or?
Yep, the session's been recorded, and it will be hosted up on our website, so lightningtools.com. There's a webinar section. I'll notify everybody that registered with the link after the session as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's it for raised hands. So once again, if you do want to ask a question or get in touch, you can get in touch on contact@lightningtools.com, or by tweeting myself at Brett Lonsdale or at PJCov. But I guess apart from that, thank you very much everybody for attending and being so patient with the issue that we had. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and also thank you, Penny, for helping to present the session.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
and
everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.